What will shape Syria's future? Its new president has promised to unify the country in his first speech to the nation. He insists he will form a government that reflects Syria's diversity. But after more than a decade of civil war, how challenging is the road ahead? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Cyril Vanier. Ahmed Al Sharaa is Syria's new president, and we're getting hints of what his government might look like. He has promised a temporary legislative council will pass laws for the time being, and that it will be inclusive of Syria's various groups and factions. The international community is applying pressure to make sure he keeps his promises. But can Sharaa bring his country together? And will his government be able to improve the lot of the Syrian people who've been battered by more than a decade of war? We'll get to our guests in just a moment. First, though, Fintan Monahan has this report.
From leader of an opposition armed group to Syria's interim president, Ahmed Al Sharaa says it may take 4 years before elections can be called. But in that time, he'll prove that his government can unite the Syrian people.
We realize this is a transitional phase and it's part of a political process that will require the commitment of all the Syrian people, inside and outside the country, to build their future with dignity and freedom without any marginalization. We will work on forming a transitional cabinet that will reflect the different categories and components of the Syrian nation. And we will also build a new institution until we reach the phase of fair and transparent elections.
People celebrated the beginning of the transition. Sharaa has already abolished the constitution and dissolved parliament, removing remnants of the toppled Assad government. A transitional council will pass laws until a new constitution is adopted. On Thursday, Qatar's Emir Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani became the first foreign leader to visit since the fall of Assad. The Qatari government has praised Syria's progress so far.
We truly thank you for the announcement you made yesterday about the end of the revolution phase and the transition to the phase of establishing the state, reconstruction, and unifying side by side with all the children of the Syrian people to build this nation.
Ahmed Al Sharaa was the leader of a Sunni armed group. Syria is majority Sunni, with smaller numbers of Shia, Christians, Druze, and others. He's promised that the new Syria will be inclusive and respect the rights of minority groups and women. But the US and Europe have concerns. He'll need to win their support in order to ease international sanctions. The EU has laid out a roadmap, but its approach is cautious.
We reached the political agreement to begin easing sanctions on Syria. This could give a boost to Syrian economy and help the country get back on its feet. While we aim to move fast, we also are ready to reverse the course if the situation worsens.
Syria will need all the help it can get. Many of its cities lie in ruins. A decade of war and sanctions has destroyed the economy. The UN says around 13 million people are going hungry, and more than 7 million are displaced. Whatever shape the Syrian government takes, its ability to unify the country and improve the lives of the people may prove the most vital measure of its success. Fintan Monahan, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
So let's bring in our guests. In Geneva, Dani Al-Baaj, Vice President of the Syrian Forum for Advocacy and Public Relations. He also led the cabinet of Syria's Deputy Foreign Minister. This was in the late 2000s. In Norman, Oklahoma, Joshua Landis, Director of the Center for Middle East Studies at the University of Oklahoma. And in Washington, D.C., Mohammed Al-Abdallah, Executive Director of the Syria Justice and Accountability Center. A warm welcome to each of you. Dani, let's start with you. At this very moment, the future of Syria rests, I was going to say exclusively, not exclusively, but largely on the shoulders of the new Syrian president, Ahmed Al Sharaa. In your assessment of the man, is he up to the task?
Thank you very much for hosting. And yes, still now what we have seen is that there is a vision, there is a plan, and this guy is delivering what he is promising for. So the interim president, Ahmed Al Sharaa, who was de facto since day one acting as a president, has all the powers to actually do all the steps needed to ensure security, to base the main steps towards any kind of transition. All that we've seen him basically meeting all these leaders, all these visitors from all around the world, have shown capability and determination that he wants to continue making the best out of the victory that he simply led. So there were other scenarios that we might have anticipated or people were wishing for. However, let's be clear, this is the most pragmatic yet realistic kind of scenario that everybody expected. Now we have Ahmed Sharaa in power. Now we know who will be responsible for all these steps. And he's definitely going to be monitored, not only internationally, but definitely by every single Syrian who actually fought the last 14 years to reach the moment of truth, which we hope to see soon by having the free elections that he mentioned in his speech.
The timeline for those elections to happen is about 4 years. That's the timeline that Sharaa has indicated. Joshua, Sharaa has dissolved parliament, dissolved the army, cancelled the constitution. Are these, in your view, necessary steps to rebuilding Syria, or could it be a dangerous power grab?
Well, I think it's both. We don't know yet. That's the real answer here, is we don't know in which direction this is going to go. In his speech, which was a very moving speech, the first half was extraordinarily moving in talking about
first address to the nation.
People. Yes, and he but you know, we've seen Syrian leaders come to power and speak in the name of the people and talk about helping the peasants, the workers, the people who've been discriminated against before. And then we've seen it turn into dictatorship. And we don't know which way it's going to go today. In his speech, he talked about free elections, but he also talked about a government based on justice and consultation. So he's speaking to two different audiences. One audience is the more secular Syrians who want democratic elections, much like the West. And the other is an audience that's looking for justice, but consultation also means something in an Islamic context where you have a shura. And this, so he hasn't really decided which way his government is going, whether it's going to go in the path of a secular, democratic, Western type government, or whether it's going to go in an Islamic path with justice and consultation. And that remains to be seen, because many of the people who brought him to power are expecting much more Islamic government than a Western type of government.
Mohammed, I'm keen for your point of view. Here's Sharaa's stated roadmap for the future of Syria, the immediate future. 1, form a new transitional government that reflects Syria's diversity. 2, form a small legislative body to make laws. 3, hold a national dialogue. 4, draft a dialogue on Syria's future, right? What the country should look like. Then draft a new constitution, then go to elections. All of this should take 4 years. Is this, in your view, a good roadmap for Syria, both on paper and in practice?
Good morning. While the roadmap might list items that Syrians have demanded from day one after the collapse of Bashar al-Assad, I have not seen that to be the most positive plan, to be honest, for a lot of reasons. One, Sharaa has already been the president of Syria, de facto. The parliament has been dissolved, de facto. The constitution has been suspended or cancelled, also de facto. And in real life, has Al-Ba'ath party or the security agencies or the military are all gone. So what he announced after 54 days of being in power and doing all that things, he announced what happened on December 8 or December 10, whenever he came from Idlib to Damascus. There's that. The second part here is if you read the in-between of the speech, where the dialogue to discuss our vision of the government versus what was the dialogue should look like a month ago when his foreign minister, Shaybani, stated in Jordan that the dialogue would set the nature of the new Syria and the structure or the type of the new Syria. The second part is
what's the nuance there? I'm not sure I'm getting the nuance.
The nuance is the dialogue should be on equal footing, should be with everyone. Geir Pedersen, the UN Special Envoy, invited for the dialogue from Riyadh in front of the Syrian foreign minister when he was in Riyadh. The UN is trying to bring everybody in equal footing versus what Ahmed Al Sharaa said yesterday in his speech, basically the dialogue to discuss our vision of the government, his own vision, not the Syrian. So I have a concern, are we coming here on equal footing, or are we coming to be kind of a Al-Ba'ath party, inviting the other parties to discuss Al-Ba'ath party's vision of power? There's that. The other part, quickly here, if you look at the in general, the statement he made about making this transition legal and consulting all legal people to make it representative and legal, we have not seen that consultation. We don't know what's the legality of this. I'm not questioning it. He's the de facto president of Syria, and this move should have happened, honestly, 50 days before. But the promises he's making, and this is my concern, the promises he's making for Syria goes beyond, really, the authority of a transitioning president and the time period you would envision a transitioning president to be in office. You cannot speak about all these things while you tell us you are, in the same time, just interim, you're just appointed to take care of the country, and you're waiting for this election. The other three quick things, he decided, it seems, in Syria to be presidential state, not parliamentary, not other type of government, and also inherently centralized state. When he spoke about spreading his authority over Syria and every single inch of Syria or centimeter of Syria. And that's kind of already setting the stage for the Kurds saying and for the Druze and Suwaida, no decentralization is going to be presidential system. These should have been decided after the national dialogue, not based on his speech.
Okay, there's a lot in there, and I think that really lays the basis for this conversation that we're having today. Danny, what I'm hearing when I listen to what Mohammed just said is that really the devil is in the details. Saying we're going to hold elections, a national dialogue, elections, new constitution. Okay, there's nobody really that disagrees with the end goal of a new constitution and elections and an inclusive government. But it is how you get there and what that ends up really looking like that I think is the question we're debating today. Based on the 54 days, and I think it's fair to say 54 days is not a whole lot of time, right? After 50 years of Assad rule. Based on the 54 days that Ahmed Al Sharaa has been in power, what do you see there? And does it give you more hope or more concern for what's to come?
It's mixed, actually. I mean, we've seen certain steps that showed, for example, dealing with the regime supporters. For example, we have seen some violations, human rights violations in certain areas. However, people were expecting way wider kind of violations. It has been dealt with in a good way till now. On the other hand, we have seen a kind of a confusion about certain decisions, especially when it comes to economic ones and financial ones. So it's clearly that what they have, Salvation government, when it used to govern Idlib, that was a certain space, certain geographical area with very limited resources, but also they themselves were like a kind of a small government that's running the day-to-day services, hand in hand with a lot of NGOs that used to also help in the same area. Now they're facing reality. Now the heavy weight of that big inheritance from the fallen Assad regime is facing them. Plus, we have this huge bureaucracy that is called state institution that needs to reform, that needs to work, and you cannot stop it. You cannot ask the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to stop, for example, and then rebuild. You have to make
they want to fire one-third of civil servants
to
begin with. They want to reduce the size of the government, not the government, but of the bureaucracy.
That's a choice. You do that, you send people home, and then you will be facing another social problem from the other hand, because these people needs work. So unless you start making the economy run and have enough jobs in the market, this would be only adding to the burden of the social role of the government. So here we see the confusion. However, again, as Mohammed said, let's take it step by step and let's see if really the upcoming transitional government is inclusive, if technocrats with good CVs and good history and a proof of work is appointed as these ministers, if in key areas within each technical ministry, from agriculture to telecommunication to power to oil and mineral resources, are appointed and make it run, then yes, this might have hope. And I believe they have no other choice but to go that path. The question would be also, if we're going to have this declaration, who is going to be there on the table in order to make sure that this declaration is in line with the minimum standards or international standards of human rights, of respect, of
Sorry, which declaration? Do you mean the
non-discrimination, so on and so
constitutional
forth.
declaration? What would in effect be a new constitution going forward, at least for the next few years? Is that what you mean?
Yes, in that sense, at least to know how is the division of power between the three authorities is there. We should see in this declaration a clear-cut respect for the judicial authority, that's a branch of the government, and to see that this independence and it's respected and there's no interference, it's this work. Otherwise, if everything will come from the legislative branch, from the government, to tell the judges what to do, then we haven't done this revolution for exactly repeating the mistakes of Assad. So this is what we need to wait and see. That kind of distribution between power, the balance, who's going to monitor who. For sure, I know one thing. The people are monitoring. The people has their eyes open because they cannot afford anymore any delay in moving forward in Syria. Otherwise, there's a huge risk that everything might collapse.
I see Mohammed looks a little skeptical there. We'll get to you in a second, Mohammed. Joshua, how much of a runway do you think Ahmed Al Sharaa has? He's been in power 50 plus days at this point. I think everybody can agree that is not a lot of time by any measure, by any standard, to rebuild a nation. But he is saying the timeline, the horizon is 4 years. Now, when you're starting to look at 4 years, that leaves plenty of time for people to be disgruntled and for this transition to go off the rails in one of a million different ways. How much trust do you think there is in Sharaa? How much of a runway?
Well, this is a honeymoon period, and I think Syrians are extraordinarily thankful and grateful that he has defeated the Assad regime. And so he has a tremendous amount, I think, of this of capital for this honeymoon period. But it will run out, and it will run out fairly soon, because he's being extraordinarily ambiguous about how, as your other commentators have already said, about how it's going to unfold. And he's talking about bringing together all Syrians, and yet the entire Kurdish northeast of Syria is not under government control. The Druze area is not under government control, and Druze are saying, we're not going to go under government control until you give us a position in the government, which he has not done. The Alawites, 12% of Syria on the coastal region, are being purged from the government institutions as we speak, and are under considerable duress. They're very fragmented and disorganized now, but they won't remain that way forever. So he has a certain amount of time, but Syria is in a dilemma, as both of your speakers have said. It needs authority, because 40% of the country is ruled by foreign armies. Turkey has 12, 13% in the north, America 30%, and Israel has grabbed a big hunk on the Golan. And how do you consolidate the nation without a strongman? And yet at the same time, Syrians have had so many strongmen. They want a constitution, they want rule of law. So he's torn between the Scylla and Charybdis. And it's going to be a very difficult path ahead. But you ask, how long will this honeymoon last? Already you're hearing more and more voices that are critical and who want a share of power, and they're not getting it.
And I note that there was, only a few days ago, a protest, a small one, but a protest nonetheless, that took place in Daraa against the plans to cut jobs in the civil service, right, in the bureaucracy. And that's something you would not have seen under Bashar al-Assad. People were protesting against what they called the arbitrary dismissal within the bureaucracy. Mohammed, whose support can Ahmed Al Sharaa count on for now?
Now, this is a very important point indeed, because Ahmed Al Sharaa, as Josh mentioned, seems to addressing two audiences: his own Salafi jihadi base that helped him fight Assad and win militarily, but also he's trying to address the Syrian people at large, the more the wider Syrian, the secular, the minorities, and more importantly to him in his vision, the West, because he's waiting for international legitimacy, lifting sanctions, and rebuilding reconstruction financing of Syria. So the point is Ahmed Al Sharaa is not trying to capitalize on the Syrian public, the people who, in quote, love him, the people who are, as Josh mentioned, they're happy they got rid of Assad. They just don't want to repeat that story again. If Ahmed Al Sharaa ran for election, honestly, fair election, he would win by a vast majority. Nobody will stand facing him in this election. The point here is the dynamic of power internally of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, how much Ahmed Al Sharaa is willing to go to the international and the multilateral nature of a state where he works with the minority, appoint women in position, where he have political participation of every other party in the government, versus having his own base where they're demanding more share of the power. They fought hard with him. They standed all the difficult years of Idlib and the fighting against the Russians and the Syrian military. So he's, in my opinion, looking to get legitimacy from the international visits coming to Damascus, from meeting with international important people versus the Syrian. I'll give a very small example. In my area of work, the human rights, Ahmed Al Sharaa met with the mother of Austin Tice, the American prisoner or hostage has disappeared in Syria on the Assad regime hands. He is yet to meet with any mother of a Syrian missing person, although those are in thousands. He is yet to make a visit to Sidnaya detention facility, which became a symbol of basically the suffering of Syria and the Syrians during the Assad regime. He's more trying to gain the legitimacy and show the legitimacy of the international. That's why we have two speeches. We have the one addressed to the West that Ash-Shaybani, the foreign minister, says in Davos. But then when you come back to Syria, you get a foreign minister that's not engaging much on the vision of the Syria. You get the minister of justice who executed women when he was a judge in Jabhat al-Nusra in Idlib. And now he's the head of the minister of justice. And he is the one who will be tasked theoretically with the transitional justice profile in Syria. You got
Mohammed, this government is supposed to change in relatively short order, right? Because the current now we agree that Sharaa's team is the team that was running Idlib, and it's a point that Danny was making earlier. Idlib's a very small, specific corner of Syria, small population in the northwest. Right now, Sharaa's team is the same team that was running Idlib since 2017, pretty much. But the prime minister has until March. And then, as I understand it, the transitional government is supposed to be a different team.
Now, this is very important. We'll see if that will happen, honestly, because that was the very first initial announcement that this government is going to be there for 3 months till March. But then Al Sharaa made a change and said the constitution drafting needs 3 years, the election needs 4 years. And now in his speech, he didn't really reference the promise of the 3 months transitioning authority. Is he going to change the cabinet? I hope so. I wish so. I want him to change this cabinet. I want him to bring a government that represents all Syrians. I want to bring people, as Danny mentioned, technocrats who has clean CVs, no human rights violation. They're not on the terrorist watch list of the UN, the US, and the EU. We have a lot of problems with the way Syria is governed today. But again, this is a very short period of time, as you mentioned. We're testing how he's going to respond to the reactions of a lot of the Syrians who are demanding more representative government and more functioning authority in Syria. My big concern, this will not change. This is going to continue in this way. And there is basically a lot of suffering people going through. Cutting the civil servants from the government is causing financial issues on the Syrians. And Al Sharaa will be faced with a big dilemma financially. He's unable to feed the Syrians. If you look at the international visits so far, a lot of them came with conditions. They did not actually put money on the table yet. They're waiting for the man.
Let me ask Danny a question about this. Yeah, your point is well taken on the financial difficulties that Syria is in right now. Many Western countries have sanctions, economic, financial sanctions on Syria. That is the case of the US, the UK, the European Union, the United Nations. We heard earlier the EU's considering lifting sanctions, but they haven't done that yet. Should, Danny, in your view, should all these countries lift the sanctions, or should they keep them on in order, this is what they're doing now, to apply pressure on Sharaa?
Let's divide sanctions into two groups, two baskets. We have the targeted sanctions, which is after the gross human rights violators, entities and companies that have been involved in that, or crony capitalists of Assad. Sanctions for this should be there. It should be even researched more, be more precise, and try to bring back to the Syrian people the money that was stolen from. Now, the other basket, it's the sectorial sanctions, which was, when it was imposed, linked to gross human rights violations. If we decide now that these violations has been at least on freeze, stopped, not happening anymore, the main reason behind it, and having Assad in power and Assad regime in power, that fallen, the main reasons behind it is not there anymore. To use it as a bargaining chip to make sure that the transition is in line of what the West want or what is the international community want might not be fair to the Syrian people who has been suffering a lot because of these sanctions. And we've seen it. People who've been in Damascus have seen how much the quality of life has degraded. So, and if we want someone to stand against any future authoritative regime, let's make sure that the resilience of the Syrian people is there and that we empower them and that we're not fighting them off with their food, with the electricity, with the very small services, with even small transactions of money from the expats and the diaspora into the country. Let's open that. There, then the first result we can see is that the resilience of the people would start to be built again. If we want to start their role as people monitoring or voting or asking for change, this has to be through lifting the sanctions. Now, I do agree.
Danny, let me jump in because we have about a minute left. I want to make sure I get one last one in to Joshua. Joshua, this is an unfair question, caveat, but if you had to guess, with a minute left on the show, what do you think Syria will look like 5 years from now?
Well, first of all, I think America should lift sanctions, but in 5 years, this government will never get off the ground with sanctions imposed on it and with its oil sequestered in the Northeast. Secondly, in 5 years, I think we'll have a strong man in Syria. I think they'll be considerably improved over the Assad regime. This government is going to represent a much broader part of Syria than the last government did. But on the other hand, I do think it's very difficult to see how this constitution is going to unroll because Syria remains extraordinarily divided. And, when everybody says 4 years for elections, but it was Al Jazeera who asked him, could there be elections in 4 years? And he said there could be. He didn't promise elections in 4 years. He said it was a possibility. Okay. And now everybody has clung to that 4 years. But we don't really have a firm promised timeline.
All right. That's the time we have for today. I'd like to warmly thank all our guests for joining us. We'll, of course, discuss Syria again going forward. Thank you to Dani Al-Baaj, Joshua Landis, and Mohammed Al-Abdallah for joining us. Thank you, too, for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website. That's aljazeera.com. For further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on X. Our handle there, @AJ Inside Story. From me, Cyril Vanier, and the entire team here in Doha, bye for now.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.